The sky above Rabaul is on fire. 6 Japanese Mitsubishi A6M0s spiral downward through black smoke, while tracer fire tears across the clouds above the Pacific. Below them, a single American Grumman F-6F Hellcat banks violently through the chaos, its massive engine screaming while the pilot fights the controls with both hands. The Zeros are lighter, more agile, superior in a turning fight. Every pilot in the Pacific knows that. The manuals repeat it endlessly. Never dogfight a Zero horizontally. Never bleed speed. Never enter a sustained turn against Japanese fighters unless you want to die. But Lieutenant Commander Edward O'Hare is ignoring the manuals completely. And somehow, he is turning inside them. February 1943. The Pacific War still feels uncertain. The Japanese Empire controls enormous stretches of ocean and island chains across the South Pacific. Allied forces are advancing slowly, but every mile costs ships, aircraft, and men. Around the Solomon Islands, the sky itself has become a battlefield where technology, tactics, and survival evolve faster than official doctrine can follow. The Americans believe in armor, firepower, and survivability. The Japanese believe in maneuverability and offensive aggression. One side builds fighters like hammers. The other builds them like swords. And somewhere above coral reefs and jungle coastlines, pilots are discovering which philosophy survives combat longest. The Japanese Zero entered the war like a myth. During the first months after attack on Pearl Harbor, Allied pilots described the aircraft almost supernaturally. The Zero turned tighter than anything Americans had ever encountered. It climbed rapidly, rolled smoothly, and seemed capable of hanging motionless in the sky while enemy fighters stalled trying to follow it. Pilots who fought it incorrectly rarely lived long enough to try again. The early Pacific campaigns became brutal lessons in adaptation. American Grumman F-4F Wildcat pilots learned quickly that the Zero could dominate one-on-one turning combat. The famous Thatch Weave tactic emerged specifically because no American fighter consistently outmaneuvered Japanese aircraft individually. The Americans survived through teamwork, discipline, defensive geometry, not superior performance. Then the Hellcat arrived, and many Navy pilots hated it immediately. The Grumman F-6F Hellcat looked enormous compared to the Zero, more than 2,000 pounds heavier. Broader wings, thicker fuselage, massive radial engine. Pilots transitioning from Wildcats joked that flying the Hellcat felt less like operating a fighter and more like steering industrial machinery through the sky. Some called it a flying truck. Others called it a tank with wings. It did not feel elegant. It felt heavy, but hidden inside that weight were things Japanese aircraft lacked completely. Armor behind the pilot. Self-sealing fuel tanks. 6. 50 caliber machine guns capable of shredding enemy aircraft in seconds. And beneath the cowling, the gigantic Pratt & Whitney R-2800 Double Wasp producing enough horsepower to drag the aircraft through maneuvers lighter fighters could not sustain at high speed. The Hellcat could absorb punishment. The question was whether it could survive long enough to deliver punishment first. At Henderson Field, everything feels temporary and exhausted. The airstrip itself is carved brutally from jungle terrain using crushed coral and packed dirt. Japanese destroyers bombard the area regularly at night. Mechanics repair aircraft beneath camouflage netting while tropical heat mixes sweat, aviation fuel, and engine oil into a permanent smell hanging over the field. Pilots sleep beside patched aircraft inside muddy tents. No one stays clean. No one stays rested. Everyone stays alert. Intelligence reports arriving that week are grim. Rabaul is reinforcing again. Rabaul is not simply another Japanese airfield. It is the centerpiece of Japanese air power in the South Pacific. Hundreds of aircraft, runways hidden inside jungle clearings, fuel depots beneath camouflage, anti-aircraft batteries dug into volcanic ridges surrounding the harbor. To attack Rabaul means flying directly into one of the most heavily defended air zones in the Pacific. And every pilot at Henderson Field understands the same reality. If something goes wrong over Rabaul, nobody is coming to save you. The mission briefing is brutally direct. Escort the bombers. Protect them from interceptors. Get home alive. Edward O'Hare listens quietly while officers discuss fuel margins, approach headings, weather conditions, and estimated Japanese fighter strength. He asks no questions, makes no speeches. He simply listens, then walks toward his aircraft. Other pilots watch him carefully. Some admire him. Others remain skeptical. Because Edward O'Hare already carries a reputation larger than almost any carrier pilot still alive. A year earlier, flying from the USS Lexington, CV-2, O'Hare had attacked a formation of Japanese bombers nearly alone after becoming separated from most of his squadron. In minutes, he shot down 5 enemy aircraft and damaged several others, preventing them from reaching the carrier. The action earned him the Medal of Honor. Newspapers transformed him into a national hero overnight. But heroism creates dangerous expectations. Some younger pilots privately think his survival came partly from luck. Others assume his success depended more on aggression than skill. And now he is flying the Hellcat, an aircraft many naval aviators still distrust deeply. Too heavy, too stable, too cautious. Built by engineers instead of fighter pilots. O'Hare never complains about the Hellcat. Instead, he studies it obsessively. For weeks, he flies the aircraft under every possible condition. High fuel, low fuel, high altitude, low altitude. He pushes the Hellcat repeatedly toward the edge of controlled flight, simply to understand where the edge truly exists. Other pilots see flaws. O'Hare sees parameters. And parameters can be exploited. Edward Henry O'Hare was born in St. Louis in 1914 into a family shaped by contradictions. His father was a lawyer deeply connected to organized crime circles in Chicago. His mother was intensely religious and determined that her son would grow into something disciplined despite the dangerous shadows surrounding their family life. Young Edward became quiet early, observant, analytical. He listened more than he spoke. As a teenager, he watched his father secretly assist federal investigators building the tax evasion case against Al Capone. Then he watched his father die for it, shot inside his own car before the trial ever began. The murder was never officially solved. O'Hare almost never discussed it afterward. But people who knew him later noticed the same quality repeatedly. He trusted preparation more than emotion. Because preparation survives chaos. At the United States Naval Academy, classmates remembered him as calm under pressure and unusually methodical for a naval aviator. Not reckless, not flamboyant, not loud. He approached flying like a systems problem. Fuel, angles, energy, timing. As though survival itself could be engineered through understanding. By the time America entered World War II, O'Hare already understood something many fighter pilots resisted admitting. Air combat was not primarily about courage. It was geometry. When he transitioned into the Hellcat program in late 1942, he immediately noticed something other pilots overlooked. The Hellcat could not outturn the Zero in a traditional low-speed horizontal dogfight. That much was true. But combat did not require fighting on Japanese terms. The Hellcat possessed advantages hidden inside speed and stability. At high velocities, the Zero's controls stiffened dramatically. The lightweight Japanese fighter bled energy rapidly during aggressive vertical maneuvers. Its elegant low-speed agility became a weakness once the fight accelerated. The Hellcat behaved differently. It remained controllable at speeds where the Zero became unstable. It rolled faster during high-speed reversals. It retained energy better during climbing turns. The aircraft was not more agile. It was more controllable. That distinction fascinated O'Hare. He began developing theories quietly. If you forced the Zero into high-speed combat, its advantages shrank. If you fought vertically instead of horizontally, the Hellcat's engine power compensated for its weight. If you maintained speed above roughly 250 knots, the Japanese fighters stopped feeling magical. Most pilots kept trying to make the Hellcat fight like a Zero. O'Hare realized the game itself needed changing. He tested the theories relentlessly. Mock dogfights, formation exercises, energy retention drills, vertical reversals. He refined the maneuvers until they stopped feeling experimental and became instinctive. And by the time the mission toward Rabaul begins in February 1943, Edward O'Hare understands the Hellcat more deeply than almost anyone in the Navy. He knows exactly what the aircraft can do. And more importantly, he knows what everyone else incorrectly believes it cannot do. The coast watchers hidden deep inside the jungle around Rabaul spot the American formation long before the bombers reach the harbor. The warning moves quickly through the Japanese defense network. By the time the Americans cross the coastline, enemy fighters are already airborne and climbing through scattered cloud cover toward interception altitude. The bombers continue anyway. There is no turning back now. Heavy American aircraft rumble toward fuel depots, runways, and supply installations hidden beneath camouflage nets spread across volcanic ridges surrounding the harbor. Below them, anti-aircraft batteries begin firing almost immediately. Black flak bursts spread across the tropical sky. The bombers hold formation. Bomb bay doors open, and the air begins filling with fire. Edward O'Hare watches everything from above and behind the bomber group. His Grumman F-6F Hellcat feels heavy with fuel and ammunition, but stable. The massive Pratt and Whitney engine vibrates through the airframe with controlled violence, while sunlight flashes across the Pacific beneath broken cloud layers. Then the Zeros arrive. They come fast, disciplined, precise. Groups of 3 and 4 slashing through the bomber formation with frightening coordination before climbing away and repositioning for another pass. Tracer rounds streak between clouds while aircraft twist through smoke and anti-aircraft bursts. The formation begins dissolving almost instantly. Bombers drift apart under pressure. American fighters dive to intercept. And above the chaos, O'Hare notices something dangerous. One bomber has fallen behind. Its right engine is smoking badly. The tail gun position is silent. No escort remains nearby. And climbing toward it are 6 Mitsubishi A6M0s. The bomber has seconds left. O'Hare does not call for help. There is no time. He shoves the throttle forward and dives. The Hellcat accelerates brutally. 300 knots. Then more. The aircraft feels less like a fighter than falling artillery. Control forces stiffen beneath his hands. But the Hellcat remains stable even at speeds where lighter aircraft begin feeling nervous and unstable. That stability matters. O'Hare lines up carefully on the trailing Zero. No wasted movement. No hesitation. Then fires. 6 .50 caliber machine guns converge at once. The Japanese fighter disintegrates almost instantly. Fuel erupts outward in orange flame while pieces of wing and fuselage tumble across the sky behind the bomber formation. The remaining Zeros scatter briefly, then regroup, and turn directly toward him. 5 against 1. Inside a turning fight. Exactly what every American briefing warns pilots never to allow. O'Hare ignores the doctrine completely. Again, instead of trying to outrun the Japanese fighters, he pulls upward into a steep climbing turn. The Zeros follow immediately. On paper, the engagement should end badly for him. The Zero is lighter, more agile, superior in low-speed maneuvering. But O'Hare is not fighting at low speed. That distinction changes everything. He keeps the Hellcat fast, very fast, above 250 knots. The large radial engine roars while the aircraft climbs through the turn without bleeding energy the way Japanese pilots expect it to. The Zeros tighten inside his turn radius instinctively. O'Hare reverses suddenly. He rolls inverted and pulls downward through the vertical, converting altitude into raw speed before snapping upward again into another climbing spiral. The maneuver shocks the Japanese pilots momentarily. Because the Hellcat is not behaving correctly, the American fighter is supposed to slow down in sustained turning combat. Instead, it keeps accelerating through the reversals. O'Hare has spent months studying exactly this behavior. At high speed, the Hellcat remains controllable. At high speed, the Zero becomes vulnerable. Its controls stiffen. Its lightweight frame loses stability during violent directional changes. And every tight horizontal turn bleeds precious energy away from the Japanese fighter. The Zeros are now trying to fight around 200 knots. The Hellcat remains comfortably above 250. That difference becomes everything. O'Hare swings around again, fires a short burst. A second Zero erupts into smoke and flame before rolling downward toward the ocean. The remaining fighters tighten formation instinctively, attempting to trap him inside a conventional turning engagement. But O'Hare refuses to fight conventionally. That is the entire point. He is not turning tighter. He is turning faster, using speed itself as maneuverability, using vertical geometry instead of flat circular dogfighting. The Hellcat's heavier weight suddenly becomes an advantage because the aircraft retains momentum where the lighter Japanese fighters begin slowing down. Another Zero gains firing position briefly. Tracer rounds flash past O'Hare's canopy close enough for him to see individual streams of glowing orange crossing the cockpit glass. He pulls harder into the climb. The G-forces slam him deeper into the seat, while the Hellcat strains upward through the turn. The Japanese fighter overshoots. Exactly as O'Hare predicted. He reverses instantly. Fires. The Zero's wing collapses inward, and the aircraft tumbles violently into a descending spin. 3 destroyed. 3 remaining. Now additional American fighters begin arriving over the battle. The Japanese pilots recognize the changing balance immediately. They break away and dive toward cloud cover rather than continue the engagement. O'Hare does not chase them. That matters too. An undisciplined pilot pursues. A disciplined pilot protects the bomber. He reforms beside the damaged aircraft and escorts it safely away from Rabaul. The debrief afterward feels strangely quiet. The intelligence officer asks O'Hare to explain the maneuver sequence in detail. O'Hare shrugs slightly. I kept my speed up. That is his main explanation. Then another. The Hellcat turns fine if you don't let it slow down. Around the room, younger pilots exchange uncertain looks. Because for months Navy doctrine has rested on one foundational assumption. The Zero outturns everything. Therefore, never turn with it. The logic makes sense. Boom and zoom tactics save lives. Dive. Fire. Climb away. Avoid prolonged engagement. The manuals teach American pilots to remain defensive and cautious around Japanese maneuverability. But O'Hare increasingly believes the doctrine itself has become limiting. Because doctrine assumes ideal situations. Combat never provides ideal situations. Wingmen disappear. Bombers separate. Fuel calculations fail. Pilots suddenly find themselves alone above the Pacific with enemy fighters closing rapidly and no altitude advantage available. In those moments, manuals stop matching. What matters is understanding your aircraft better than the enemy understands his. O'Hare has been thinking this way since his Medal of Honor mission aboard the USS Lexington, CV-2. Even then, he survived partly because he ignored standard procedure. He attacked aggressively, pressed closer than regulations recommended, trusted timing and geometry more than caution. But now the difference is important. This is no longer improvisation. It is principle. He has spent months building a mental map of the Hellcat itself, where it bleeds energy, where it holds it, how throttle position changes turning geometry, how speed changes the Zero's handling characteristics. Other pilots keep trying to make the Hellcat behave like a Japanese fighter. O'Hare understands something they do not. The Hellcat wins by being itself. After Rabaul, he begins quietly sharing his methods. Not through formal lectures. Through conversations beside aircraft and inside briefing tents late at night. He teaches younger pilots how to control energy during turns. How to predict overshoots by reading enemy nose position. How to reverse direction vertically without sacrificing speed. Some pilots listen immediately. Others dismiss him as lucky. But the combat reports keep returning. The Hellcat performs far better than expected. The Zero becomes vulnerable at high speed. You can survive turning engagements if you control the geometry. Eventually, the Navy Training Command notices. Observers interview O'Hare directly, hoping to standardize the tactics formally. But O'Hare distrusts rigid formulas slightly. Every fight changes. Every sky changes. Every pilot changes. You can't write a manual for chaos, he tells one officer. You teach principles. Still, tension grows inside the squadron. Some older pilots believe O'Hare is becoming reckless. They argue he is encouraging younger aviators to take unnecessary risks against superior turning fighters. Dogfighting Zeros still sounds suicidal to many of them. O'Hare does not argue emotionally. He simply points toward the returning aircraft. His pilots are surviving. The Japanese are not. Then the war changes again. November 1943. Operation Galvanic. The American fleet assembling for the invasion of Tarawa becomes the largest concentration of naval power yet gathered in the Pacific. Dozens of carriers. Thousands of aircraft. Entire oceans of steel moving westward toward Japan. And the Japanese know exactly how important the operation is. The attacks begin constantly. Night bombers. Reconnaissance aircraft. Torpedo approaches against the fleet. The skies above the carriers stop belonging to day or night. Combat becomes continuous. O'Hare is now Air Group Commander aboard the legendary USS Enterprise, CV-6. His responsibilities extend beyond his own survival now. He coordinates fighter defense for the fleet itself, while radar-guided interception still feels primitive and night combat remains barely understood. Pilots are exhausted. The tempo never stops. On the night of November 26th, radar operators detect incoming Japanese bombers approaching through darkness. O'Hare volunteers immediately to lead the intercept. Night fighting over open ocean is almost pure instinct. No visible horizon. No reference points. Only black sky, glowing instruments, radar vectors, and engine noise. Still he launches. He takes off with 2 wingmen into total darkness. The Hellcat's cockpit glows faint green from instrument lights while blue exhaust flames flicker beyond the windscreen. Somewhere ahead, hidden inside clouds and night, Japanese bombers are approaching low and fast. Radar controllers guide them closer. Closer. Then finally, O'Hare sees the silhouette of a Japanese bomber emerging against the darkness ahead. Edward O'Hare closes on the Japanese bomber until the aircraft nearly fills his windscreen. Point-blank range. Too close according to every safety regulation in naval aviation. But night combat over the Pacific in 1943 barely has rules yet. Radar interception remains primitive, communication is unreliable, and pilots fly through darkness using little more than instinct, instruments, and occasional flashes of tracer fire. Ahead of him, the silhouette of a Mitsubishi G4M Betty emerges against the clouds. O'Hare fires. The bomber explodes instantly. Orange flame erupts outward with such violence that the shockwave physically jolts the Grumman F-6F Hellcat backward through the night air. Burning fragments tumble past the canopy while smoke briefly swallows the fighter whole. Then darkness returns. Complete. Absolute. O'Hare searches for additional targets. The radio crackles with confused voices. Someone nearby is firing, but nobody is fully certain at what. Night fighting still borders on experimental warfare. Pilots operate inside black skies where depth perception disappears completely and friendly aircraft can become indistinguishable from enemy bombers in seconds. Then tracer fire suddenly flashes across O'Hare's cockpit. Bright. Close. Too close. And then, silence. His wingman calls over the radio. No response. Radar controllers request position confirmation. Still nothing. Edward O'Hare vanishes into the Pacific night. For days afterward, search aircraft comb the ocean around the fleet. They find nothing. No wreckage. No raft. No body. The official report eventually lists him as missing in action, presumed dead. The exact cause remains uncertain forever. Friendly fire. Enemy gunner. Mechanical failure. No one truly knows. The Pacific keeps its secrets. Edward O'Hare is 29 years old. The loss hits the fleet harder than commanders initially expect, not only because of what O'Hare already accomplished, but because of what he was still building. His ideas are only beginning to spread through Navy fighter doctrine when he disappears. The transformation has started. The man helping drive it is suddenly gone. But the ideas survive. And ideas proven in combat become difficult to kill. By mid-1944, the Hellcat dominates the Pacific Air War almost completely. The numbers become staggering. Nearly 75% of all Navy air-to-air victories are scored by Hellcat pilots. The kill ratio against Japanese fighters reaches nearly 13-1 in some sectors. Pilots who once mocked the aircraft now trust it absolutely. The fighter they called too heavy becomes the deadliest carrier aircraft in the Pacific. And the tactical philosophy behind that success increasingly resembles O'Hare's thinking. High-speed maneuvering, energy management, vertical reversals, aggressive throttle control, using geometry instead of instinct alone. The famous thatch weave evolves further as Navy pilots incorporate the same principles O'Hare tested near Rabaul. Maintain speed, force overshoots, fight vertically whenever possible, never surrender initiative willingly. Training programs across the fleet begin changing. New pilots entering combat squadrons are taught something radically different from the assumptions of early 1942. Do not focus on what the Hellcat cannot do. Master what it can. That distinction changes the war. Squadrons using these methods consistently report lower casualty rates and higher kill counts. Combat evaluations repeatedly show the same pattern. The Hellcat performs best not when flown like a Zero, but when flown like a Hellcat. That realization sounds obvious in hindsight. During war, it feels revolutionary. Veterans who flew beside O'Hare rarely describe him as reckless. That surprises many historians later. Instead, they use quieter words. Methodical, precise, calm. He did not gamble carelessly. He calculated aggressively. There is a difference. The engineers at Grumman noticed the reports arriving from combat squadrons applying O'Hare's methods. They pay attention carefully. Control surfaces are refined. Engine tuning improves. Minor adjustments are introduced based directly on operational feedback from pilots learning how to exploit the aircraft's strengths instead of compensating for imagined weaknesses. The Hellcat evolves rapidly because pilots like O'Hare reveal what the machine is actually capable of under combat pressure. By the war's end, more than 12,000 Hellcats are built. No Allied fighter destroys more enemy aircraft. It is not the fastest fighter of World War II, not the lightest, not the most elegant, but it becomes arguably the most effective carrier fighter of the war. And its effectiveness grows directly from pilots willing to challenge doctrine instead of worshipping it. Historians later credit the Hellcat with helping shift the balance of air power permanently in the Pacific. But aircraft alone never change wars. Pilots do. The ones who test assumptions, question limitations, adapt faster than the enemy. O'Hare understood that instinctively. After the war, his name is given to O'Hare International Airport outside Chicago. Millions of travelers pass through it every year without recognizing the story behind the name. Fewer still realize that Edward O'Hare did not die during some glorious daytime dogfight, but inside darkness while helping pioneer the future of naval air combat. Leading from the front. Again, his Medal of Honor citation praises courage and heroism. It says less about curiosity, less about preparation, less about his obsession with understanding systems deeply enough to challenge accepted limitations. But those qualities mattered more than any single victory. Because victories fade into history, methods survive. There is a photograph taken only weeks before his final mission. O'Hare stands beside his Hellcat with arms crossed, flight helmet tucked beneath one arm. Tropical sunlight reflects off the aircraft's fuselage while oil streaks run beneath the engine cowling. He is not smiling. His face looks tired, focused, calm. The expression of someone who understands risk mathematically rather than romantically. Pilots who knew him later remembered that expression clearly. Not fearless, prepared. The men who survived the Pacific carried those lessons forward long after the war ended. Some became instructors. Some became engineers. Some became test pilots pushing early jets towards speeds and altitudes that once seemed impossible. And many taught the same core principle O'Hare believed deeply. Doctrine is a starting point, not a conclusion. In later decades, the Navy studies O'Hare's combat reports repeatedly. His ideas influenced training programs at places like Naval Air Station Miramar and Naval Air Station Oceana because the underlying concepts never stop matching. Energy, angles, decision-making under pressure, understanding your aircraft more completely than the enemy understands his. The technology changes. The geometry remains. Edward O'Hare never writes memoirs, leaves no philosophical speeches behind, no grand declarations, only terse after-action reports, flight logs, and the memories of men who flew beside him. But those fragments reveal something powerful. A pilot who believed the distance between theory and survival is measured by willingness to test assumptions personally. Eventually, the Hellcat proves capable of defeating nearly anything Japan can launch against it. Not because the aircraft is perfect, because pilots learn how to unlock its logic. O'Hare helps teach them that. He does not invent the Hellcat. He reveals it. That becomes his real legacy. Not medals, not headlines. A way of thinking. A refusal to accept received wisdom without testing it against reality. A belief that courage without thought is wasteful. But thought applied with courage changes outcomes. The skies above the Solomon Islands are silent now. The jungle has reclaimed abandoned runways. Aircraft wrecks have rusted into the earth beneath tropical rain and vines. But somewhere inside faded Navy archives, Edward O'Hare's combat reports still survive. Neat, precise, methodical. The handwriting of a man who believed the answer to fear was never blind confidence. It was preparation. And the answer to impossible odds was never luck. It was understanding. He flew his final mission into darkness and never returned. But the ideas he left behind kept guiding pilots long after the Pacific War ended. And in many ways, they still do.